Hello everyone and welcome. Today I want to talk a bit about how I play Lambda, why I play her the way I do, and hopefully give you guys some tips on how you can improve your own Lambda gameplay and start doing more fancy combos with her. So first things first, let's go to the very basics and talk about something that I would recommend starting to avoid doing as you're playing Lambda. And that is just to follow her basic attack string, where you press attack and attack. Especially if you're letting the first attack play out, it's very slow, it takes a long time to do, and it doesn't really do enough damage either, compared to her other options. The other bad thing about this is that the second hit of the combo string will all constantly end up pushing enemies out of your range if they're not against a wall, and you'll end up missing follow-up attacks unless you move around. So instead of these, you have a lot better options to do, such as your heavy attack, which comes out very quickly. You have a dash attack, which comes out quickly, and the dash attack also knocks enemies into the air, which is going to be useful. We'll go into that more as we go along. And then another really good combo tool that Lambda has is the fact that with her MP skill, you can press it between 1 to 3 times in a row. And each of these activations will cost 30 MP instead of other characters, for example, where you might press your skill button and you drain your entire MP meter at the start of the run, and you can't use your skill for combos for a long time until it regenerates again. Lambda doesn't have this problem because you can just do the first hit or the first 2 hits, and then by the time that your skill comes back off a cooldown, your MP will be regenerated again. This is best done with just the first hit of her skill, because the cooldown is based on how many inputs of the skill that you do. If you do all 3, it'll have the longest cooldown. If you just do 1, it'll have the shortest cooldown. And if you do 2, it'll be somewhere in the middle. So that's something to think about when you're doing your combos. If you want maybe a bigger burst of damage, you can go ahead and do all 3 in the middle of your combo. But if you just want to keep the combo going for longer, then you can just weave in the first hit of the skill as you're playing. I think this is something that makes Lambda feel much more fun to play when it comes to both having no potentials and having a lot of potentials. Lambda is very, very effective at combining both of her attacks and her skills together in the middle of combos. And Entropy Effect in general is a game that lets you combo things together very freely. So you can do this with other characters as well, just taking advantage of how the game itself works. The game basically wants you to use your tools in creative ways, rather than following the same combo strings every time. You can definitely follow the same basic combo attacks every time, and combo strings, things like that. It's just the game gives you tons of options of other things to do instead of it. So what I recommend doing instead of Lambda's basic attack string combos, like I said, they're not very good. Start practicing doing her heavy attacks and her dash attacks. The one thing you do need to watch out for with heavy attacks is they're better to use at close range than long range. If you do need to just push enemies off of you or keep them busy, like if I need to knock this enemy down real quick and then attack enemies on the other side of me, heavy attack's still good for that. In terms of doing combos, though, it's better to be close to the enemy. Otherwise, when you're trying to do some of your follow-ups, they might miss. One thing you can do if you notice that your dash attack does miss is do a second dash attack in a row, and you'll usually hit enemies before they can get back up anyways. So after you get used to some of the heavy attacks and dash attacks, you can start adding in jump attacks in the middle of them too. You can either go straight from the heavy attack into a jump attack. That one's a little more awkward, and it's a little more timing based of when you'll use your jump attack. You don't want to use the jump attack too early and end up missing the enemy. You want to use it later once you get close to it. The timing's not really that strict or that difficult, but there is a little bit of a timing aspect there. The combo that feels a little smoother is doing dash attack into jump attack. With this, you can get the jump attack off right away as soon as you jump into the air, rather than having to try and do any real strict timing. So then, once you get the hang of something like that, you can start mixing other things into the dash attack as well. So after the dash attack, you can start doing your skill, for example. So we're doing heavy attack, dash attack, skill, for example. That's just like a basic combo starter that I do real often on Lambda. You can also just go straight into the dash attack instead of putting the heavy attack first if you want. Either way works. There's a reason why that you want to get real used to doing dash attacks in your combos, and we'll go over that soon. But for now, practice the heavy attack into dash attack into skill, or just the straight up dash attack into skill. Similarly to mixing things up, you can do 2 hits of your skill or 3 hits of your skill off of this whenever you want to. There's no limitations there. I usually end up doing just like single hits of the skill because it's faster and it lets me transition into other attacks more quickly. But there's no real right or wrong way to do it. It's just however you want to have fun with the game. So then, after you put in your skill inputs there's a lot of different things you can follow up the skill with. You can follow it up with another dash attack, another heavy attack. The heavy attacks might be a little harder to land sometimes, but they generally combo into it pretty well. It's just, if the enemy gets launched too far away, or too high into the air, like probably for an example I can maybe do it here. See, the enemy was too high in the air when I had used 2 hits of my skill, and that can be the downside of doing heavy attacks out of your skills. But dash attack should work there, and then jump attack would also work there. So the only real limiter on doing combos in this game is basically your own creativity of how many different inputs you want to put back to back. And there is a little bit of execution barrier with input speed, but it's not too bad in this game compared to other action games or other fighting games. You don't need a whole ton of technical skill to pull off combos in this game, I feel like. It's more about your creativity of combining different attacks than having real heavy technical skill, in my opinion. There are definitely a lot of combos in this game that do take technical skill, and there's a lot of things you can do with technical skill, but it's not as heavy as it is in other games in terms of like a barrier to entry. So if you're having a hard time with combos and getting things started, just keep working on it a bit, and you should start being able to get things down. So now let's finally go into the reason why you would even want to start doing some of these combos in the first place. Lambda has a passive that when you make an enemy fall, you restore MP. I'll dump my MP here real quick, and then knock down an enemy. If you see here on my MP meter, nothing changes, and that is because the passive actually requires you to knock an enemy from a certain height into the air. If you want to know a more detailed explanation about how this passive works mechanically, it's actually more of based on the enemy's falling speed momentum than it is based on height, but that is not something that comes into play very often in this game. There are a couple attacks that can abuse the falling momentum, but not many. So in general, you can just think of it as you need to launch enemies a certain height into the air before you'll start getting effects of the passive. And that's why I say that her dash attack combos are very useful to start learning. If you start utilizing these launch-based combos into your gameplay, especially early on in the start of runs, you're going to notice that Lambda feels a lot stronger to play, and she feels a lot more fun to play, because you're going to have a constant supply of MP back. Pretty much by the time that the MP gets to you and your natural MP regen starts to take off, you will be full MP again, just as soon as you get that MP refill. The one thing that you do need to be careful about is that since the passive is based on the enemy's falling momentum, you can cancel their momentum by hitting them out of the air as they're falling. So I just did a lot of combos there, where even though I was hitting enemies up high into the air, I wasn't getting the passive off. For this reason, it can be more useful at times to just purposefully let the enemy fall and hit the ground before you start trying to continue your combo strings. You can get a lot of very quick combo strings and a lot of very fancy catches off of the launches, but a lot of times this will lead to the enemy's momentum getting cancelled before you get your passive back. So that is something to keep in mind while you're playing. If you're not getting your passive back very often, you're either not launching the enemy high enough to get the momentum you need, or you're canceling it in some way. This can also happen because of tactics as well. Some of the summon tactics can automatically attack enemies for you, which puts them into hit stun, which then cancels the falling momentum. So there's another reason why, if you're wondering, I'm launching enemies into the air and I'm not getting the passive, that can be a reason why too. Next up, let's look at just a couple of Lambda's potentials quickly. Now let's try and take a quick look at potentials. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of depth about potentials, and I'm not going to go into a lot of them, just to try and keep the video time down a bit. It's already gone on quite a lot. So to begin with, the first potential I want to talk about is Sword Summoner EX. This is a potential that I put into all of my builds, whether it be an attack-based build or a skill-based build. This works similarly to your MP skill, where you can press the button multiple times to get multiple different attacks out. The important thing for my gameplay is that if I only press the first attack of this, I'm always going to get the MP back from it. It launches the enemy high enough that I get the MP regain here. The other really fun thing about this is that you can start jumping out of the attack animation before the attack even finishes. This applies for even if you're doing the longer versions of the combo, but again, I usually end up tending to use maybe the first 2 hits or the first 1 hit. I like comboing into other attacks rather than staying into the same attack for too long. So another good way to use it, if you want to use the longer combo strings of it, you can just do your regular grounded version, and then you can jump and do the aerial version. That'll give you enough height. For some reason, I wonder if the enemy is hitting the top of the screen there. That might be what's going on. It's actually proccing my passive in midair, which doesn't usually happen. And I feel like it's might be because the enemy is hitting the top of the screen. The training room actually has like a wall at the top of the screen, so you can't go too high, but most stages won't have that type of thing. So you can do your up attack into the jump version of it to make enemies get height that you need, even if you're doing the longer combo strings. You can also do jump into your skill as well, and that'll give enemies enough height. You can do some other things out of it as well. This is just going to be a very good combo tool for you overall. and it's going to make it easier to proc passive. It'll let you proc your passive from further away. It's safer than going into your dash attacks, so there's a lot of benefit in picking up this potential, even if you're going for a full skill damage build. The utility on it is just very nice to have. The next thing I want to talk about is some more skill-based build types of things. The common skill-based build for Lambda is to go all in on your Luminous Slave EX portals, which is the highest DPS option you have. Being able to stack so many portals for so cheap, and the DPS that the portals themselves do is just way too high in terms of the amount of damage compared to the amount of MP that you spend. But that can get boring to play if all you're doing is spamming the portals and standing back and watching them doing work. So another MP-based skill you might want to try going into is stuff with Sword Summoner EX Elysium. The first and third upgrades aren't really anything too notable. The first one can be pretty cool. It makes it where if I knock the enemy into the air, for example, the blades will just spawn in the air rather than spawning in front of me. This can also be a bit annoying at times when you're trying to position your skill in a certain way and it jumps to an enemy instead, but in general it's a pretty decent potential to have. It's probably not going to bother you too much to have the homing unless you're trying to do like a lot more specific or advanced things. In general gameplay, it's not going to mess you up, and it's probably going to help you more than mess you up. But it is just something to keep in mind. It's not a very high priority potential to get, in my opinion, but it is something that can be fun to play around. And then the third upgrade here, where you can summon more blades, doesn't end up coming into play a whole lot. It's more of a thing that gives you more AoE damage against big groups of mobs. It's not going to do a whole lot in terms of your DPS, unless you're getting an enemy on a corner, like you can see here. When I have the enemy on the corner, it does cause more of my blades to stack up together and give me a little bit more damage, but it's nothing too crazy. The one you would want to prioritize is the middle upgrade. After each attack, you can immediately press attack to summon blades that thrust downwards. So similarly to how we have the skill input 1, 2, and 3, you can press up to 3 of them. It's up to you, or you can just do like 1. This follow-up works in the same kind of way. So I can press skill 1, attack 1, skill 2, attack 3, attack 2, and then so on for the third one. So skill, attack, skill, attack, skill, attack. And it does a new set of combos for you. This is also the same way that you have freedom to just press skill 1, 2, or 3. You can press these attacks at any of 1, 2, or 3 of these skill inputs. You're not locked into having to do them in any specific order. Hopefully that all makes sense. It's a little bit hard to explain that, but basically it's just you can combo your attack input out of any part of the skill input, even if you haven't done it on the earlier ones. So you can use it on just the third one, for example. You can use it on just the second one, or just the first one, or you can use it on up to all 3. It's up to you. So next thing I want to talk about is the fact that this middle effect will also buff some of your other skills that you might be picking up. Legacy Edge, for example, is a skill that can be a bit rough sometimes because it pushes enemies way far away from you and way far away from where you're trying to hit them, which can be a benefit sometimes, but in general it can make things more difficult for you to follow up with your combos, and it can be annoying to play around. So with this upgrade, you can also follow up your Legacy Edge with an attack input, and you'll summon a second portal, which will fix that issue of knocking enemies around. It'll just hold the enemy in place instead. And again, it's the second upgrade that you need for Sword Summoner Elysium to activate that effect. This also applies to her other skill input, which is Calamity Sword. Calamity Sword, to explain this one real quick, is that it also has two different types of inputs as well. You will need a potential to get the second input. The first type of input for it is just down plus skill, and you let go of down immediately. So one thing you could probably see right there, and another thing to mention, is that if you have the homing upgrade from the first potential here, that homing effect will also take place on your Calamity Sword. Most of the time it doesn't come into a whole lot of play, but you could see it did help me there because the enemy was pushed off screen by the time I had used my Calamity Sword. So the other type of Calamity Sword input you can do is where you hold down and it will do the 3 sword attacks instead of 1. So there's 1 sword or 3 swords, depending on if you hold down or not. These also both have their own unique follow-ups when you're doing the attack input afterwards. So that's the follow-up for the single sword version, and this is the follow-up for the triple sword version. You can do really cool things out of the triple sword version, where you catch them as they fly behind you, or you can start trying to catch them in midair off of it. That's more of something that's going to be like more of a combo video tool than used in practical gameplay, because in practical gameplay a lot of the times regular enemies are just going to die by the time the Calamity Sword damage hits. It can be used on some bosses. Some bosses can be thrown around when they're in their stun state, but like I said, it's not going to be nearly as practical as a tool as the other things I've talked about. That's more of like a combo video type of thing to catch off of it. But the input, the extra input itself is good in itself, just because similar to how it works with the Sword Summoner Elysium, it doesn't cost you any extra MP to do the second input. It's just free extra damage and free extra hits for you. So one thing I want to talk about real quick before I end this off is something to watch out for when it comes to using Luminous Slave EX portals. That's the up plus skill input that is pretty common for people to use on Lambda. The only downside to this is that, especially as you start stacking multiple of them up at the same time, they are going to be constantly canceling the falling momentum of the enemies, which makes it where your passive isn't applying anymore. So if you're putting down a lot of these portals and you're wondering why you're suddenly not getting your MP regained back anymore from your passive, that's why. Another thing to mention real quickly is one of the few ways to exploit the passive being based on momentum. You can follow up your Sword Summoner EX Elysium attacks, which is the just basic version of her skill, and all of them will knock the enemy downwards quick enough to apply your passive. You can even get the passive applied 3 times in a row in the same string of combos, which is pretty insane. I'll try and dump a lot of my MP right here and show you guys just how insane the MP regain on it is. I will need about 100 MP to start things, and now let's start it off. Now I should get a huge jump in MP there. There we can see it. I procced it all 3 times that time. So that's something that you can use if you're doing more grounded-based combos. You can add those into your combos as an easy way to get MP back from the passive. The portals can still cancel the momentum of this one too, but it will happen a lot less often with this than it will with your other combos. So that's going to be it for this one. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.